rollout of the highly anticipated one-dose vaccine from Johnson & Johnson is facing hurdles. A Biden administration official telling CNN they initially planned to receive as many as 30 million doses by April if it's approved, but now they're expecting 20 million. That pushes back the timeline for vaccinations by about a month. Phil Mattingly is out front from the White House. So, Phil, how significant is this setback?
Well, Aaron, look, in a moment where every day, every dose is the matter of life and death, it's certainly not ideal for the administration, but it also underscores the caution that you've heard from many administration officials over the course of their first 4 weeks in office in terms of predictions about when things will get better, when vaccines will ramp up in a major manner. They understand that every element of the production, every element of the distribution is subject to change and subject to something going wrong. And that certainly seems to be, at least to some degree, the case here. They do expect as many as 20 million doses by the end of April. The company, Johnson & Johnson, still saying they expect to deliver 100 million doses by somewhere between June and July, but it just underscores kind of the volatility in this entire process. Now, the administration over the course of the last 4 weeks has ramped up their weekly dose distribution, almost 57% more than when they took office, 1.7 million vaccinations going out over the course of the last 7 days. So the ramp up is happening, but the reality is without the major influx of doses from Moderna, from Pfizer, and then from Johnson & Johnson, when they get their emergency use authorization approval, which is expected in the next 2 weeks, they can't provide the type of mass vaccinations needed to get the country near some type of herd immunity level. So every piece of this matters right now, Aaron, and certainly this is an element of frustration for an administration that is still trying to ramp up the entire infrastructure.
All right, Phil, thank you. So I want to go now to Professor William Haseltine, groundbreaking HIV/AIDS researcher, and our own Abby Phillip, our senior political correspondent and anchor of Inside Politics Sunday. Okay, thanks to both. Professor, let me start with you. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine rollout going to be slower than initially thought, presuming it gets that approval. 10 million doses short of what they expected. And this comes as Dr. Fauci has pushed back Biden's timeline for all Americans now to the end of July, right? Now, Fauci had said he wanted that to be April. Anyone who wants a vaccine can get it. Now it's July. Do you think the administration is being aggressive enough here?
I think they're doing what they can. One of the things that's clear from the beginning is when you're manufacturing new drugs, new vaccines, which is quite complicated, you can't be sure what you're going to get at the beginning. Over time, you get confidence in what you're doing. But these are complicated vaccines. The Johnson & Johnson is a virus that in itself is complicated, and you can't predict how many doses you're going to get from each batch. To me, it's amazing that Moderna, that Pfizer, BioNTech has done as well as they have, but we surely would like them to do better.
So, Abby, today, Vice President Kamala Harris refused to say whether it should be mandatory for teachers to be vaccinated before going back to school. Obviously, the CDC has been clear on this, that they do not think that vaccination should be a predicate for teachers going back to school. But the vice president did not go that far. And shortly after she didn't do so, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, said this.
Neither the president nor the vice president believe that it is a requirement. It's not a requirement to reopen schools, but they believe that teachers should be prioritized.
Okay, so Abby, she's trying to go with, she knows what the CDC said, so she's trying to stick with that. But look, they're having trouble. They're struggling on this issue. Yeah. And perhaps because the CDC was pretty clear that you don't need teachers vaccinated to open schools. Why can't they get this straight?
Yeah, it seems pretty easy, actually, to say what Jen Psaki said and what another White House advisor earlier today, Jeff Zients, said. Exactly the same thing, which is the CDC's recommendation is one thing, to that it is not a requirement for teachers to be vaccinated in order for schools to reopen. But yes, we would also like for teachers to be prioritized. It's not clear why they won't take that extra step. I think one hint is the obvious one, which is that this involves an issue of teachers' unions, who are a major Democratic constituency. They want vaccinations to be a pillar of the reopening plan. They also want a lot of other things. They want class sizes to be smaller. They want, the metrics to be tied to community spread. But the Biden administration is clearly trying to walk this line, and it seems almost as if there is a distinction between what they are willing to say through surrogates, through the White House press secretary, for example, and what Biden Biden and Harris themselves are willing to say. And at the end of the day, Biden and Harris were the ones who campaigned on the science. Their unwillingness to even reiterate what the science is seems to undermine that pledge.
Right. I mean, that's the thing, right? When that was your entire message and the science is now saying you don't need this predicate, it's a pretty hard position to be in, as Abby points out. Professor, we know of a lot of variants now around the world, right? Some of them here in the United States. The ones we seem to know the most about are both more transmissible and likely more deadly. Now, we found a new study that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are still effective against the variant first identified in South Africa, less so than the others. Antibody activity dropped. But, how far ahead of things are we when you look around the world and you see so many variants coming up and this thing mutating as quickly as it does?
Well, it's a rapidly evolving situation. First thing I would say is the news that it's partially effective against these variants is very good news. We've seen some indications that that is going to be true. The higher the immunity you get from these vaccines, the broader their activity. But it's also a matter of time. Over time, the strength of the immunity drops somewhat. And the difference between the first strain that you're vaccinating against and the other strains gets wider.
Yeah.
Gets wider. That means it doesn't necessarily protect for going 4 months. So I think there's some real questions on that score. There's also questions about how many variants are out there. Right now, I count 5 major variants spreading in the United States. There are likely to be more, and we have to know the answer for all of those variants. So it's a rapidly evolving situation. We're not going to know much more. I mean, we actually learn almost every day goes by. We're learning more about these variants, how they're spreading. I just say one thing. People should be, first of all, get vaccinated and be even more careful. These variants can get through the standard mask and infect other people. They can begin to infect children.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand this too, right? A lot of people seem to think a vaccine is going to be, okay, now I can go back to, seeing friends and family, and people are starting to hear that that's not yet the case, and it's hard to hear, but significant. I know it's been consistent from you and others. Abby, I want to ask you one thing before we go. This is about the pushback that Biden's getting from the left flank of his party, right? They wanted this massive student loan cancellation, right? $50,000. He was asked about it, stood firm, not going to do it. Today, AOC, Elizabeth Warren, were actually joined by Chuck Schumer, a moderate, vowing to keep fighting on this issue. Can Biden hold back the progressive wing on this?
Biden ran on not signing on to a lot of these things, but particularly on the student loan issue. And that was reflected in how quickly and clearly he answered that question. I think for both sides, it's important for them to make their positions clear on this issue. It doesn't hurt Biden to say, I'm not for $50,000 in student loan forgiveness, because he's trying to be somewhere to the center left. And progressives also themselves really need to basically say, we are pushing for our priorities. So I think on both sides, it's really important for them to do that. But we also have heard, even before the election, from some progressives who suggested that a narrow majority in the Senate and the House will almost force their hand. They know that they don't want to lose out on some big wins in the interest of getting, in the interest of just pushing back on Biden. I think at the end of the day, they will sign on to COVID relief bills and other things if it means, getting something instead of absolutely nothing.
All right. Thank you so much, Abby, Professor Hazeltine. I appreciate both of you. And next, Trump warning that he will take down any Republicans who did not have his back during the impeachment trial. It's a direct lob, of course, at McConnell, who is about to respond. We've got new reporting on what he's going to do